Okay, couple of reminders. Current event, blue and yellow, you're due next Friday. Okay? Blue and yellow, you're due next Friday. If you get it sooner, turn it in to me. I'm good with that. Today we're going to go through internal bleeding. Tomorrow we're going to do a collaborative group exercise. I'm going to give you some scenarios. You'll work through it, and then we'll talk about it as a class. That's a lot of the first aid stuff is more working collaboratively within yourselves, even acquiring information and things like that. It's a lot less me standing up here and lecturing you guys, which is probably a good thing for you. I'm sure you get tired of hearing my voice ramble away sometimes. So our objective today, to be able to describe how to care for internal bleeding, what internal bleeding looks like. You know, what are signs of internal bleeding? Those are the two most important parts of today. Internal bleeding, in your packet on page, what, 3? Internal bleeding, escape of blood from arteries and capillaries or veins. In other words, the escape of blood from blood vessels. That blood stays internal. When somebody turns their ankle doing something, and it swells up and it turns black and blue, that's blood going up right there. Now, incorporated with internal bleeding, as I'm teaching right now, will be some shock material, because shock is very much related to internal bleeding. And shock is defined as when the body's ability to adapt to the physical stress of an illness or injury. Your body needs to respond always when you have something happen to it. And when it can't respond, that's when shock can occur. There's several different ways you can get internal bleeding. From a blunt force, being hit with something, falling, smacking your head, something like that. There's chronic medical issues. For example, an ulcer. Does everybody know what an ulcer is? Okay, so an ulcer can be activated, and you'll have internal bleeding. And then obviously an object penetrates the skin and hurts an internal structure, but there's no external bleeding from it. A knife, a bullet, but there can be external bleeding, but oftentimes, you know, there is. But you can still have that internal bleeding. Yeah, Dylan.
Where it says blood is made up of, there's only two spaces.
Two things, liquid and solid. It's made up of liquid, which is plasma, and solid. That's your blood cells, red and white. What's white blood cells do, everybody? Yeah, it fends off disease, exactly. And then platelets are part of that. The third thing up there, it just says that your blood essentially comprises of 7% of your body weight. So if you ever want to lose a large chunk of weight,
Drain your blood.
drain your blood. Just kidding. The functions of your blood: transport oxygen, nutrients, and waste, protect you against disease, and to help stabilize your body temperature. By staying hydrated, your blood runs smoothly through your body, and that's how your body temperature is maintained. Everybody good? All right. Signs of internal bleeding. I've got a few for you that I want you to make sure you have down, because these are some of the most prevalent ones. Tender, swollen, bruised, or a hardened area. For example, the abdomen, your stomach. Cool, moist, pale, or bluish skin. And when I say that, you think about somebody spraining something. Somebody who's throwing up, coughing up blood. Obviously, that's signs of internal bleeding. And the other one up there, excessive thirst. What's going on with the body if they have excessive thirst? They're dehydrating, exactly. Now, somebody who has an altered mental state, it becomes a little scary because they could be going into shock. And these same signs are very similar, like the altered state, things like that, rapid breathing. Those can be shock related as well. It drives me crazy that my entire screen is not filled. I'm going to have to send an email and get that taken care of today. And I also don't like how it's grayish. It's like my light bulb's going again. Yeah, it's just, it's definitely just,
lavender.
it's discolored. How about that? All right. For minor internal bleeding, an ice pack wrapped up with a towel or some gauze placed right over the source or right over the location of the bleeding. That will, yeah, just put it right over it. Basically, what it's going to do is slow down the flow of the blood there because it's cold, and take some of that swelling away. Bless you. For severe internal bleeding, it's a little different. It can be very severe. Not a lot you can do though. We want to make sure if we know somebody has severe internal bleeding, some of those signs are going to be more prevalent. The altered state of mind. You know, we want to make sure that we've called 911. You want to monitor the person, help them rest comfortably, and reassure them. Because there's not a lot you can do at this point. You know, minor internal bleeding, somebody's running, twists an ankle. You can sit them down. You can elevate their foot. You're going to learn the Rice formula. But you can set them down. You can elevate their foot. You can throw some ice on it. And that can take some of the pressure away from it. Here's a little teaching point for you. If you ever encounter somebody who twists an ankle with a shoe on, a high-top shoe, don't take the shoe off to put ice on it. Try and put the ice around the top of it. Once you take that shoe off, it's just gonna blow up like a balloon. So that pressure from the shoe keeps it from expanding really quickly.
Which is nice.
Pardon me?
It's good.
Yeah, it is. Okay, let's talk about shock a little bit. When you have an adequate flow of blood, your heart's working well, your blood vessels are intact and adjust to the flow, and it's circulating. When those things change, and your body is not able to compensate for it, the potential of shock arises. So if you look at that last sentence up there, it says, when severe, body may be unable to adjust and shock can occur. My wife and daughters were on their way to softball practice. This is about 3 years ago or so. And a girl, my wife was going 55 on a 55-mile-an-hour road. But it was only a 2-lane road. And this girl was in a vehicle, and she pulled right out in front of her with, you know, basically from me to the board away, which is how far? Maybe 20 feet. And my wife smashed into her. So I hurried up and went out to the scene of the accident. And my wife and my younger daughter were okay. But my 13-year-old at the time was sitting there with kind of a far-off look in her eyes. And I asked the EMT what was going on. And he said, well, initially she was fine. He said, but she started to slip into shock. So me teaching this stuff, I wanted to hear what he had to say about it. And I pretended like I didn't understand. And he's like, you know, she started to... I asked her some questions and she was okay, the first couple of answers, and then she started to give me bizarre answers and get a far-off look in her eyes. And I said, well, what did you do? He said, I just kind of brought her back to where we were. I asked her some simple things again, her name again, her age again, you know, and it kind of reeled her in somewhat. But she still was very frightened and had a little bit of a far-off look in her eyes.
But I don't understand if shock's like when your body can't adjust. How is like talking to someone? Like I understand like you kind of start to like go out of like consciousness, but how does like
Right.
talking to someone fix it?
Mental, part of shock is mental as well. And being refocused and reassured takes away from the focus of what's going on with your
Okay.
body and puts the focus more on
Just the,
what's going on with your brain, if that makes sense.
Makes no sense because when you're in
Okay, so there's,
Wait, can you go back? Because
You got it?
severe body movement.
I'm here for a lot.
we're gonna look at the different types of shock now. You good? Okay. So there's 3 different types up there that we're gonna look at. The first one is cardiogenic. Cardiogenic obviously is gonna deal with what?
Failure of the heart.
Heart, exactly. Failure of the heart to work correctly and get the oxygen going through your blood to all parts of your body. Can come from trauma, disease, can come from respiratory distress. Those are the 3 big things that I have up there underlined for you. Yes, you can put poison in there, but you know, those are the 3 main things I wanted you to understand. Distributive shock. This is when your blood vessels dilate. I think of anaphylactic shock when I think of distributive shock because they go hand in hand. If you get a spinal cord injury, brain trauma, that's distributive shock. If you get a bad infection, you can go into shock because it's impacting your blood and your blood vessels can dilate. And then the last one up there, hypovolemic. Hypovolemic. This is when you lose a lot of blood or bodily fluids. When somebody gets extremely sick and they're conscious, but they're throwing up consistently, if you're not replenishing that fluid in you, then that's when you can go into shock. Somebody who loses a ton of blood or hemorrhaging, you can go into shock. So you really got to be cognizant of those things. Three types: cardiogenic shock, heart-related, distributive, which is relating to the blood vessels, and hypovolemic, which relates to bleeding and bodily fluid loss. Yes, sir.
How would burns, like,
Where would it lead?
shock?
Where would it fall into?
Well, how does it
A burn
activate hypovolemic shock?
because of the bodily fluids. So how do we care for shock? It's really pretty simple. There's not a lot you can do. It's much like the care for internal bleeding. All right? You control any bleeding that might be there. If there's a dislocated bone or a broken bone, you stabilize that so that you can either A, move the person to a safe location or a care facility, or have them prepared for EMTs when they arrive. Keep them reassured, and no matter how much they ask you for something to eat or drink, you cannot do that. If they go into shock while they were eating or drinking, they could choke. So you've got to be very cognizant of that. Again, not a lot you can do for somebody who has internal bleeding or shock. The big thing is to care for the conditions you find with either ice or a cold pack, if it's not as bad of internal bleeding. and to reassure them and keep them comforted until you can get them professional help. Any questions about shock or internal bleeding? Anything from you guys? When we come back in tomorrow, our scenarios that we work through will have some of these related things, and you'll be able to work through them to the best of your ability.